It's Today in EVE Online, Monday, January 27th, 2020. I'm Matterall here with Delacar. How are you doing, Delacar?
Good morning. Doing well.
Good. So yesterday, we'll try to give you some real-world news to give you context if you're listening to this later. Yesterday, while we were doing Talking in Stations proper, right about 45 minutes after we started, in real life, Kobe Bryant crashed in a helicopter and died with like 8 other people. Super tragic. So that was happening while we were on air, and we found out right after we got off. Excuse me. I found out a few hours later, actually, because my son found out, and he said, "Hey, this just happened." So it's amazing how fast news travels now. So it was less than 2 hours after it happened, and that was literally a few miles away in Calabasas, which is on the other side of Malibu. So that was pretty traumatic. But if you're marking this time in the virtual world against real world time, that's what just happened yesterday, and here we are today. So to honor that, we put up a Discord channel for sports, in real life sports. You have to opt in, but if you want to talk sports or commiserate, you could do it in there as well. Okay, that's the real world. Oh, the other real world thing that we've been doing, and the reason that we've been inconsistent, is there's a whole impeachment of the president going on, which is now at trial in the Senate. They're about halfway through, maybe a little bit more. And so that's happening probably right now. So we'll make this short. But in the virtual world, we have all kinds of things that have been happening. Probably the biggest thing recently is this last weekend was something that was pretty extraordinary, and we covered it yesterday on Talking in Stations, and that was a gold magnet, which has never been sold in the game, so nobody understood how these things were considered priceless until now. Now there's a price, and that price is about 3.5 trillion ISK for a gold magnet, which are very rare. There's only 5 in existence, I believe, and I want to say that 3 out of the 5 have been destroyed, or I think that's what I heard from Kellon, the owner of the one that we're going to talk about. Kellon was the leader of a small champion group that fought in the Amarian succession trials. Succession trials, which is how they pick their leader in the Amar Empire. So that's something that happens inside the game as part of like the backstory or the lore. They have these houses, and the houses need to find a new leader when their leader dies, their empress. And in this case, the empress died to drifters. She was assassinated. And so they needed to find a new empress. So they ask the players to compete as champions in a tournament like gladiators. And the winner of that tournament gets these gold magnets as a reward, and the non-player character that they represent ascends to the throne. And so the winner of that was a team run by Kellon, and so he got a gold magnet, and he sat on it because he wasn't going to fly that thing. Even to put 1 kill on it, he said might be a bit dangerous. So he figured that it was a good time to sell it for a good cause, and so he was going to sell it and donate all the proceeds to Plex, that would go to Plex for Good, which is a program that the company CCP puts on. CCP puts Plex for Good offers on the table when there's a natural disaster in the real world. So what you can do is take virtual money, give it to CCP in the form of Plex, and CCP will take that equivalent in real money and send it to relief efforts. So that's what what Kellon decided to do, sell his gold magnet. And in doing so, he put it up for sale. And Scott Manley, who you might know from YouTube, he's done a lot of great YouTube work. He's kind of an astro guy that does a lot of stuff with astronomy and engineering and space exploration, and he does all that kind of stuff. And he's been playing Eve for years, on and off. He amassed a giant fortune, so he took a lot of that, bought 1 million plex, which is about 3.4 trillion ISK, and he used that to buy the magnet as a trophy, and all that money again went to relief efforts in Australia for the fires there. So that was a pretty amazing turn of events, and we talked about it yesterday in depth with both the guys that were involved in that. What we didn't get a chance to talk about, which was interesting, was that there was a scam attempt right before he sold it. So we'll get Kel on back and talk to him about the scam. Somebody tried to scam him out of that gold magnet before. And I think another person was counterbidding Scott Manley to get his 1 million plex bid up higher. And CCP stepped in and said, don't do that. If you can't afford the bid, don't fake the bid. So there's a couple of weird things that were going on, but this is EVE Online where you can't do anything without some kind of disruption. Okay, so Delica, how are you doing?
It's been a busy week. It's actually been a pretty busy month. I know in terms of what people have been able to see, it looks like Tess is kind of slumbering. I know that's sort of the general consensus. But there's been a lot going on in the background. And for those of us that move quieter pieces, we've been kept busy. We've been monitoring what's been going on up north closely. We had a battle just yesterday, two stratops, one in late, what you would call like Pacific Coast U.S. time zone, and then one very early in the morning, you would say, I guess, Australian time zone proper. And we've been trying to sort of be opportunistic.
Mhm.
I unfortunately can't speak to the goals and whether or not those fleets were super successful. My access doesn't that kind of picture, and I don't necessarily want to say exactly what like the FC said at the time because I don't know what's been and what isn't right. But what I can say is that for the conflict in the north, Test isn't just ignoring it or has given up. We're still very much looking to capitalize on any gains we think we can make.
So Test is still there.
Yes, at least if not, I would say that sort of like how I want to describe it in a way that puts the right metaphor into people's minds. We would, dip our toes into the pool to feel the temperature every day. Like the pool's still there. We still have that pool in the backyard. We just choose not to swim in it every day. So it's this kind of, and I believe, and again, I can't speak for certain, but I believe that the reason we're not committing and bringing caps or super caps, doing those things that others would say, oh, well, that heralds Test's involvement, has mostly been due to leadership constraints, time constraints on leadership's part, and also perhaps there's this question that needs answering of what happens when we go north and we bring a significant size of force that would be a threat. We have the non-invasion pack lagoons,
Mm-hmm.
but internally, I can tell you for certain there have been a couple of discussions about what happens if suddenly goons go, okay, no, you can't do that, or now that you've done that, there are going to be consequences. What are those consequences? That sort of thing. So
Yeah. So
everyone's sort of like, what can we commit without really getting in trouble? And I don't like saying it that way because it makes it sound like we're, that the P word, we're the pet or whatever. But I think it's just common sense, right? You want to, if you're good at diplomatic relations, you want to understand how your allies, enemies, and other neutrals are going to interact with you after you make a decision. And that's just this process.
so it's on your guys' mind too. Like to what extent can we get involved without running into our ally on the battlefield?
Yes, absolutely. And I think your show just this weekend kind of illuminated that every player is going to really matter. When Norris says that he's going to get involved with fraternity and bring Winterco, and then suddenly the the scales they tip a bit. the balance isn't quite where it was at. Now there's yet another element. There's a force in a time zone that wasn't expected. Okay, well, what happens again? The scales will tip, or in a certain way, who knows? If Tess makes a change and brings a significant force north, the response of either side, which you could say like the Pan Fam aligned or the Imperium aligned, and ironically Deadco's just kind of in the middle, like, hi, we're still relevant, don't ignore us or don't forget about us. But in reality, for us, right, we're more worried about the reactions of those two sides, especially with one of them being our direct neighbors.
Well, and also you're in a strange relationship with Goon Swarm and the Imperium, where you can't afford actual tensions because that could cause a problem down the road when you may need protection from other people or also from them themselves. There's a
Yep.
there's a really interesting thing going on between Test and Goon Swarm, because Billy was in Goon Swarm, but he was kicked for inactivity right after Fountain War, I believe, or before the Halloween War, before BTEC-R in any case. And in being kicked for inactivity, he was, I have to ask him, but I think he was offended. This is what I've heard. And so he's like, well, fine, I'll build something somewhere else. And he went to Test and he built something there. And he's built Test along with Pro God Legend, who did the same thing. After Nully Segunda died, he took a hiatus and then he came back and joined Villy. But Villy is an interesting player in that he's from Goon Swarm. He certainly has relationships there, but he was also offended by them. So where do his internal loyalties really lie? And it's just it's a question mark. I don't think that's something that's very clear around the board. And
Yeah.
it's not a big deal in general, except it is a huge deal today in EVE Online because he is such a pivotal character really on the map.
Well, loyalty wise, I'm sure he bleeds Test. But there's definitely, I'm sure there's residual, interaction, or he knows people who he could talk to should he need to. Although I will say that most of the time, I think there's a really great relationship in our leadership where we have our head diplomat. I think you've had him on a couple times. His
Mhm.
name's Dran. He's well respected as far as I've heard. He's well respected, and every time I've seen him do his job, he's done it really well.
Yeah.
In
And
what
I think,
circles?
well,
Oh, Cable's here. Hold on. Let Delacar finish.
in
Sorry.
from my perspective, right, all I can say is from what I've learned and what I've seen and what I've heard,
You're right.
that
You're
when
right.
it comes to the goon
I
relationship,
have dealt with Dran, and he is a very tough negotiator and he's very smart.
yeah, and I think what I'm trying to illuminate that others might not get a chance to see, from just because from the inside we can see more. Being a member of Test, I've seen this wonderful dynamic relationship where um, Dran is respected in terms of his opinion, and if Villy were to say, "Hey, if the question were to come up, hey, what are we going to do about goons?" Right? Dran's at the table. He's providing input. He's bringing whatever him and his diplomatic team have you know created thus far or maintained thus far, and saying, "Okay, well, this is the direction they say this, or this is the direction we take if they act this way." And I think Villy respects that. And obviously, Villy is handed a lot of the responsibility in terms of him and PGL. Villy's sort of seen as like the super capital head, and then PGL is more of the sub capital head. They work together, and between the two of them, right, they're going to make military decisions for Test. But I know that at the end of the day, like a question that revolves around how do we deal with the relationship with goons, it's not just on the FCs, those two FCs. It's going to also include, people like Dran, also people like Sapporo Jones, right,
Sapporo
the
Jones, yeah.
executor. And the way that it's ran is more of a, they will get involved when their expertise are called for, and then they back off and let Villy and Progod do what they do best. Run the campaigns, make sure the military is strong and growing and healthy and whatnot, and whatever metrics they use to determine that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very sure, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's good. And so it would be kind of I feel like it wouldn't be totally accurate to say that like it's up to Villy to decide, oh well, if Villy is goon aligned, then goons eventually won't, that there's some sort of net there, Villy will step in and talk to someone, like let's say it's Asher. I don't know enough goons to really pick a perfect name for this. I don't know who he might know, but if it was Asher, like he goes to Asher and says, look, man, we're old buddies. Don't invade Esoteria because we did this one thing. That I don't think that would ever be the case. It would just be it would be him stepping outside of what I would feel to be the norm. Now, obviously, they could come in here tomorrow and be like, "Oh yeah, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't see the back room chats. He has no idea." But from my perspective, I don't think that's the kind of relationship or that's the kind of procedure that is put in place in tests right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sapporo Jones had written me maybe a week ago, was telling me the origin of the name Legacy Coalition. That's what it was. And it was actually kind of funny. I'll share that with you guys sometime soon, but I got to go back and reread it. But it's kind of funny how that worked out, because it showed you a little bit about. Well, I guess I'll just tell you now, but I'll elaborate later on. They were trying to figure out a name for the coalition, right? And Sapporo is kind of a jokester, and he has this whole Subaru marketing pitch that he does, and he swears by it. And so they were trying to say, well, let's do this Mimi, coalition name. And Billy was like, no. It's got to be serious. It's got to demand respect, that sort of thing. So Billy is kind of a serious person. Maybe Sapporo and Dur, whoever else, is not as serious. And so they settled on Legacy Coalition, which was kind of funny because Sapporo Jones kind of slipped that in. It was serious enough for Villy, but Villy didn't get the reference that there is a Legacy Subaru car line. And so he snuck that in under Villy's nose, which I thought was kind of funny. Well, anyway, but I brought that example up to illuminate the differences in leadership in test. And you bring up a good point, Dalakar, that there are more than one person that deal with Goon Swarm, right? You have Dran in there, who I think is like probably one of the legitimate people that sits at the table, one of the two or three maybe. And I think you brought up something else that's interesting. ProGod has always been a subcapital FC. That's all Nully was. Nully teamed up with Northern Coalition because Nully was a subcapital team, basically. They didn't have a lot of supers. They did, but it wasn't something that they were good at bringing out. So when they got together with Northern Coalition loved being in capitals and super capitals. So that was a good combination, and that's what N3 was really known for. But what you have now is you have that Nully Segunda FC for subcapitals, ProGod Legend, moved over to Test, and in Test you have him as a subcapital FC, among other people, and then you have Villy as a capital FC, and he was for Goonswarm as well. And that combination, again, is pretty lethal. But it shows you how they have different roles that they fulfill inside of a coalition, or actually inside of an alliance, which leads a coalition. All right, also... go ahead, Dan.
I just wanted to clarify real quick. I definitely am not in a position to judge ProGod's ability to FC anything, but I'm sure that since then, right, he's had plenty of opportunities and is a good capital and super capital FC. I just wanted to, when just as a member and as sort of like what gets told to us, right? What we understand is that ProGod and Villy were, if they were both on at the same time and running, a fleet for test, Villy would be taking the super caps and ProGod would be taking the sub caps. I'm sure ProGod's very capable of commanding capitals.
You're exactly right. That's exactly right. Even from the outside, knowing history, you could note that's probably how it is. So you're on solid ground. I also want to say you and I were talking earlier about Pando's FC chats, which you can catch on Talking in Stations. You're going to see that one come out tomorrow, but that was recorded on Sunday, and it is ProGod Legend talking with Pando, and they're talking about what?
They're talking about a lot of fascinating things. They went over, they sort of put the rose-colored glasses on and talked about Stuka and Goku for a bit. They were talking about some of the encounters they had with each other. Uh, Talking about why Super and Titan fights are the way they are right now, Sino changes, Sino inhibitors, all that kind of stuff. And then they had a bunch of other talking points related to like the CSM or like they sort of discussed how training FCs can be difficult and getting new FCs the opportunities to learn and grow can be troublesome when you're in a large group and there aren't really that many great opportunities where you can say, okay, go take this out and not worry about the consequences, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing and the reason they're relatable to one another is that originally the bomber was used as basically to bomb things, right? So you would be cloaked because you could travel cloaked with a bomber and a stealth. I think it's a stealth bomber, and you could release a bomb that is indiscriminate. So it travels 30K. And as soon as it hits 30K, it ignites and it does an area of damage. So it's kind of like a good sneak attack. And it's very manual piloting because wherever you're aiming the ship, that's where the bomb goes. There's no directing the bomb once it releases from the ship. And that was the way that bombers were used essentially. And Goku was like a really popular, and I want to say Goku came around just after the Halloween War. Probably
Gotta remember that
5 years ago.
you gotta remember that CCP nerfed the shit out of them first.
Goku's or bombers? Bombs.
Bombs.
Okay, so this is probably so then.
Gave them 3 counters and then nerfed their timing as well.
Okay, so that's a good point. So if CCP nerfed the bombers, they became dormant or not very useful because you'd always have like a bomber alt. That was one of the things. If you're in nullsec, you had like your subcapital pilot, your main character. And then if you could, you would have a bomber alt. And then that became less popular, probably because CCP nerfed it. And so one of the reactions was, how do we get this ship rehabilitate it back into use? And ProGod came up. I think it was actually PL, but I think ProGod might have come up with it. He definitely takes credit for it. The Goku fleet, and the Goku was to use the bombers as actual torpedo platforms, because torpedoes are slow-moving missiles, basically, but they do a heck of a lot of damage to bigger objects. They do less damage to smaller objects, and so that's what the Goku was. It was a fleet of bombers, but they weren't used for bombing. They were used for torpedoes. And then that mutated later with, I think, what are they called? The destroyers that are able to blink, basically, or jump 100K. Micro warp drive.
And micro jump field generator. Yeah.
Oh, and micro jump field generator, which is a fixed position on the grid, and if you fly to it, you can jump. So these things allowed that group.
No, the module is called micro jump field generator.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so yeah, so you could with a certain ship, you could basically take the group of ships around you and jump around the map. That made you harder to catch. And if you couple that ability to move around the map and be difficult to catch, and you couple that with damage that you could release from the ship and that would hit your target regardless of where you went after you let that go, that's when you get the Stukas. And I think those are created by Pando. He merged those two concepts together. Release the missiles, do a ton of damage, and after you release the missiles, move your ships out of range using essentially the teleport feature in EVE Online. And in doing so, it became very, very difficult to counter. It could be countered, but it was difficult to counter, and they could just rain a ton of damage on targets, especially bigger ships and structures. So they were talking about that on this FC chat. So check that out. It'll be out in a day or two. Yeah. What else were they talking about, Delica?
I wanted to pause real quick because I wanted to let everyone know like a little tidbit of history that Goku's actually hold like a special place in a lot of test pilots' hearts because when PGL and eventually Seto started doing them originally when it very became popular in tests to go on these fleets was sort of in the big. I think it's in the middle of our Providence campaign where we were taking all those stations before they
Stations.
got converted to Fortizars. Yeah, and it wasn't the most entertaining of deployments and times. I'm sure PL would agree that they made it oh so fun every day. So many claws. Um, and one of the things that we would sort of like get really excited of, especially those of us in the United States time zones, because PGO would run them in the sort of later time zones for this. And this is there's a lot of pieces that we wouldn't be able to go over, but like
Mhm.
things were drastically different, right? We had drifter connection, wormhole connections. It was much easier to move around New Eden, which CCP took one look at and went, "Wait a second." But yeah, we were having a good time. It was a needed like morale thing. Like we would do the hard work during the day. EUTZ would grind through all of this SOV and all of these things that needed to happen, and then at the end we would get to sort of mid to late USTZ. We'd form up with PGL or Seto, and we'd go on these Goku fleets. And we would get to experience like frigate logi, and we would go and we would like kill rorks or carriers, and we would get shared stories of how the enemies would quickly tell everyone to dock up the second we appeared in a system, and all of this. And so it was a good time for us. We really enjoyed being able to go out and sort of project our number superiority, right? um,
Mhm.
Onto different places of New Eden that would normally take us hours to get to. And that's kind of important, I think, to get noted there in the footnotes of history that Goku and Stuka, right? They have a lot of people much smarter than I have debated the efficacy and the usability of these fleet doctrines, but these are some of the most interesting and most fun fleets, in my opinion, that I've ever flown on because it feels like you're, like this tiny little, like super amazing agent. You're going in between these titans or these supers and on these Rourke grids, and you're dodging and weaving. It's sort of like that Eve
Eve
promotional
is real.
thing. Yeah, where how the guy is explaining I was there, I think is the campaign they did. And it shows him in his Atron, and they made up some scenario where his Atron had to burn close in so they could warp their AHAX onto the enemy fleet or whatever. And that whole like little cinematic where it goes from a real person on like a green screen and all that stuff, you know, melds it into the character creation tool looking like character, puts him in the Atron, and you see him ducking and weaving laser fire and missiles to get his Atron close enough so his friends could warp to get within optimal or whatever it was. It felt like one of those, and now I'm stretching a little bit. I know people are going to be like, yeah, sure, okay, nodding their head and sort of looking off to the side thinking this guy's kind of crazy. But it really did feel like that. It felt like, wow, this is so neat that we can sit in this kind of comp, this kind of doctrine that allows us to just sort of go into an enemy territory, deep into an enemy territory, and just sort of what feels like, ducking and weaving all of their best stuff in there and whatnot. It was a good time. It was fun.
Oh, cool. All right, we have other people have joined us now. You have Cable from Volta and Lichgrave and
No,
oh, wait, where are you from?
I left Volta like 2 months ago, bud.
Jeez, I'm behind. I didn't know you left Volta. Did you leave or did you get kicked out?
I left,
Were you
but I
encouraged?
practically got pushed out.
I was thinking that was pure intuition
It,
there.
it was a retarded scenario, and I don't want to go into it
All
because I
right.
don't want to talk shit about people. But
I
certain
actually
individuals
I was
forced it upon me in a sense.
I was literally joking, but I laugh because it's like, oh, okay, well that's a pretty good shot in the dark to get right. Anyway, you're no longer in Volta. What are you doing now?
Just doing my own thing
In HiSec or something, or what's going on?
everywhere.
I had some people tell me the other day that you were trying to do a CTO in Stain, and something went down there. I think a bunch of dreads died. So business as usual, I imagine, right?
That was Wicked Creek, but
Oh, okay, got it. Interesting.
and
I'm glad that people are
it was
still
fun because it was like
skirmishing over.
test whelped like 7 dreads to kill my 3, and my dreads are as cheap as theirs, so
Yep.
impressively good feeding.
All right. Well, now I want to know what happened. Go into it.
So as you know, I like and I still do like the Sotio stuff, right?
Right. Let's clarify that if people don't know, you were famous for stealing the loot when a different group would do a Sotio, which is a very difficult mission and drops very expensive and lucrative loot, and you would sweep in and take it at the last second. That's what you were known for before. And CCP nerfed it recently and said, yeah, somebody can't swoop in and take it anymore because it's too heavy. Now you need a freighter, which means you need to secure the area, which is hard for one person to do.
No, you don't.
Okay, we'll take it from there.
Well, I mean, you can still do it. It's just 10 times harder, and it's hard to the point for either party, even the people running it, to the point where it's more worthwhile for me to grief other people running them than trying to steal them, because griefing has a higher success rate than trying to steal them. And in griefing, I mean as in destroy the freighter so they can't actually get the loot.
Mm-hmm.
Literally drop like a dread or 2 on the freighter, or just tackle the freighter so it dies. In which either case, the blueprint is essentially just destroyed.
Right. So nobody gets it.
Exactly. Essentially, they made the system, which I think is dumb, that incentivizes griefing over actually trying to contest.
Yeah. Maybe that was part of their idea. So what's that got to do with you taking off from Volta?
Essentially, I like to do weird special projects. I like the approach of having a goal in what I'm doing. I don't like the status quo of, oh, well, let's just gank roll every day and supers every day, because I feel like that's fucking boring, to say it mildly. And so I did the attempt for the fun of it of the Vexer meme in Highsec against the Keepstar, which people like, or at least leadership of some people didn't like, and one group within Volta didn't like, and they're very vocal about that. And then mix that with me also liking to include people from Volta and the Alliance into the whole Sotio shit. Like making a bomber fleet to kill people running the Sotio and Dreads, for instance. Essentially, it meant that people were essentially within leadership were claiming that I was literally just abusing the Alliance for my own profits. Which I can understand that reasoning, but at the same time, I would argue that it's pretty dumb. Because, I mean, yes, sure, I in theory stand to profit from that work, or whatever you'd say. But does it really matter? Like, if you get content in some way that you get to kill, like, for instance, Titans. No one complained when I tackled Titans on the Sotio and we just bubbled them until the rats killed them. Nobody complained about that because they got Titan kills, right? So I don't understand why people would complain about it when I give them kills. It's just in a different way than they normally do. And then as a bonus, I potentially stand to profit from doing that. And I don't see like why people are so butthurt about it, especially when I promised I would give a cut to the Alliance if I got a good amount of value. And essentially, it all escalated at a point where I had a pre-planned fleet. Like, I can't remember exactly what time of the day, and I pre-painted like a day in advance. And a guy within Israd who joined We From Volta like a couple months ago, and they left again recently.
They did leave. Oh, didn't know that.
Yeah, they left
that's
for
Peanut
Trigger Happy, I
Smash
think.
his group, right?
Yeah. essentially, the FC from that group, from that corp, decided that it would be apparently an okay thing to do of making a fleet literally like 15 minutes before mine, pinging out, "Hey, I have a potential super kill, yada yada yada," getting my fleet, and then took the entire fleet away from Thera, so they couldn't join my fleet 15 minutes later, even though he knew that I was going to make a fleet, and I told him in advance, which obviously meant that I didn't get the numbers for my fleet, and therefore I just couldn't do anything.
Mm.
Which I found was, first of all, that's a very disrespectful thing to do in general, and it's a really shitty thing to do to another FC within your alliance, regardless of the reasoning for it. Because the reasoning behind he gave later on is something in lines of, well, nobody wanted to go to your fleet anyway, and shit like that.
Mm. Did they end up getting their super kill?
No. And so essentially, I obviously wanted something to be done about that, because I find that to be completely unacceptable, that someone essentially cockblocks another FC from their fleet when they've pre-pinged the fleet and prepped for the fleet like a day in advance, right? That's obviously unacceptable in any alliance, I assume. So I obviously want something done about that, and the outcome of that that whole thing was that Chori is no longer allowed to, or Cable is no longer allowed to run Sotia fleets, nor is he allowed to run fleets regarding high sec. And with that as an outcome, I just went, well, fuck it, it's a waste of my time then.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that. That sounds really frustrating.
That's fucking
I
retarded.
know.
Essentially, I got punished for someone doing a shitty thing to me.
Yeah,
Which is just
that's just sad, because I think what some people don't understand when he says, when Cable says that, he pre-pinged and prepped for it, there's a lot that goes into, like, he applies. And now understand, this is coming from someone who potentially might not be Cable's biggest fan, but you don't have to be a fan of Cable to understand that he spends a lot of time and a lot of effort, as most FCs that create content do. And the last thing you want to hear is that your alliance isn't behind you, or that they don't have your back, or that they're going to do
not so
these
much the
kinds of
alliance,
things.
the leadership. The
Well, that
problem
too,
is that
right?
they should let the players decide if they want to go to a fleet or not. I'm fine with, like, if members don't join my fleet, then I'll understand. Sure, okay, nobody wants to do the thing that I'm pinging to do. That's fine. But when it's another leadership or FC that blocks you by making another fleet and then just making the statement, well, nobody wants to join your shit anyway. That's a bit. Meh. So yeah, we decided fuck it. I gotta say I felt very hurt about the whole thing, because considering the amount of effort I did, like literally keeping Volta alive at a time when the alliance was practically dying.
Yeah, you're a big
I was
part of
like
Volta.
the only FC around, essentially, because Starfleet's AFG as always. And like I essentially was the only FC ever for a long period within Volta, and I was like doing fleets fucking every day, like multiple times a day, running shit, and literally being the only person who could manage a fleet, and thereby keeping the whole alliance alive for a long time.
Hmm.
I felt very betrayed, or you'd say.
And it was leadership that you were bumping heads with?
Yeah, essentially. Well,
Uh,
it was the leadership of Israd and RTSQ,
but Israd
because
took off
Volta.
already, so why?
Yeah. Well, no, they took off after I left.
Oh, because you left a couple months ago, and they recently took
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. So like, it was Israd leadership and RTSQ leadership that I was bumping heads with, but the Volta leadership that I assumed would like kind of have my back, essentially are very AFG and like very inactive, like extremely inactive.
Oh,
And they're enabled to make decisions, which is a thing that I've called out as a problem for a long time, which is also why I stopped being a director, because I couldn't deal with the rest of leadership being so inactive and so unable to deal with problems when they arise, that I got into trouble because I was doing shit, even though I was informing everyone I was doing shit, and people apparently didn't like it, but they couldn't be asked to actually like say,
hmm.
"Yo, that's not okay." So one day, suddenly they just dumped 10 problems on my head that I had done something wrong 10 times or whatever, but they couldn't be asked to actually deal with them until it was 10 things simultaneously, right?
Right. Well, anyway, so it soured you to Volta, and you took off, and now you're doing your own thing.
Yeah, essentially.
Are you still doing these Sotio interferences or whatever?
Yeah, I invite random people that I know and trust to not be retarded.
Yeah. Well, somebody says here, Dreadit is recruiting. Any thoughts on
I have
joining?
no intention of ever joining Test. I will never in a million fucking years join Test.
And the inside joke there is that Cable frustrated Test immensely
To the
for.
point where Billy got the CSM to agree with him to them to change the shit.
We don't know because that's all behind closed doors, right? But
Sure, of course, it's behind closed doors, but I mean, I trust the guy who told me. So,
But, okay, so what do you think happened that frustrated your ability to steal the loot from people who were running these things, namely Test and did Goonswarm run these things? It was in their area. It was kind of in the.
they ran them when they were in there, yes. But the thing is that goons are obviously have been for a long time complaining. Oh, they're never spawning in our side. It's unfair balance. It only spawns on the east and so on. But what they don't realize is, I mean, they took Delve. Yeah, sure, cool. But I mean, that's not a lot of systems. Consider the amount of systems within the regions of all of the legacy space or all of PanFam space. Consider like the count of actual systems, right?
Trust me, I
So
do
if
it every day, and it makes me cry. The
what?
amount of sob, the amount of sob that we babysit in Legacy.
Well, yeah, but that's
Oh
what I mean.
yes,
Like,
there's a lot.
if you take the simple calculation, if you have say three or half of the or three quarters of the amount of the total amount of systems in New Eden nullsec, and then you have them on the east or the southeast and the northeast,
Mhm.
and then the remaining quarter in the west, then obviously statistically you're going to get more Sotios spawning in the east because there are more potential systems. And that's just the way it is. And that's obviously balanced. I mean, that makes sense, right? Goons gain the benefit of having space that are so secluded that no one can really interfere with them, which is a benefit in that sense, sure. But it eliminates their benefit of having Sotios
Mhm.
in this instance. So that's why I clashed heads with Tests so often, because they have so much space where Sotios are within.
Right. It's an issue of targeting, not an issue, not a personal issue.
No, not at all. It was never a personal thing until like
I wanna,
Billy stepped in and yeah.
yeah. I want to bring in Victor here, who's an old player. He was mentioning something about Israd. What were you saying?
Well, I was just saying it's interesting that Cable's experience with do nothing leadership mirrors my own from when I was a block FC for Honey Badger Coalition way back when. I still own FC because of my experiences there.
Oh,
And
it's not Israd's leadership that was an inability to do anything.
well, the thing is, Israd is so often. I don't profess to know how they are now, but Israd so often was the go between. So we'd get stuff from Israd people, and an Israd guy on his alt was running our alliance. But various powers that be in blocks, and I don't think it's specific to one block. You're always going to have that group of frankly do nothings that are overly critical of the people that are doing something because it makes the people doing nothing look bad. And I just kind of got that vibe off you in my old HBC days where we were
Oh,
getting.
dude, that's like literally that's always
We
what it
were
is. Like it doesn't matter. Everyone's always going to find a way to complain, even though they do fuck all. That's
there
just
were
the way.
like
But that's just
Hmm.
the way of the game, though.
there were like 10 of us and that were taking out fleets all the time, subcap fleets, cap fleets, and then Sister Bliss back in the day was merkin for us over in the HBC, and they were complaining about Sister Bliss and everybody else. Meanwhile, they're sitting there, I'm just going to collect my space monies and backseat you. And it just seems like That's kind of
Oh,
a
trust
crappy
me,
thing to do. It happens all the time,
no
but it's a
one, no
crap thing
one
to
ever
do.
backseat FCs me twice. I can tell you that right now. No one ever backseat FCs me twice. And I've gotten complaints because I can't speak to people like that. But if you come into my fleet and then you try to backseat FC me, I will tell you to
Yeah. Thanks for cleaning up the language.
profanity, a lot of profanity.
Yeah,
Profanity.
I myself remember. I remember throwing a certain person out and kicking him off our comms. His name rhymes with Jort Baggins one day because he tried to backseat me as an FC back in HPC.
All right. Let's move on though to some more news. This cable, that was very interesting. I didn't know that piece of news. What else is going on out there in EVE Online? There was an attack that's happening. Dalakar, were you saying that did that go off?
Oh yeah, yesterday there were. Oh today, yeah. I just I was watching. I'm not quite sure. They ended up going outside of what I could peer into, but looks like Siberian Squad and those folks, Deadco, are still forming up strong. They got another 120 guys out there doing something right now. I think they just got back um, regular mutant stuff, so I'd imagine probably just more soft timers somewhere babysitting. That tends to be, as someone who has experienced the long the long Sov Wars, there will be oftentimes days where you just form up because the FC structure has asked someone to go babysit a timer, and that timer being like a couple of systems that got intosist. I would hope to be able to hear, sort of like during the last Winter Co versus Legacy War. Hopefully, there will be somebody on the Deadco side who will keep us up to date, because I don't want to only hear the the Pan Fam Alliance side. I sort of I can already kind of tell how it's probably going to go. But I hope that somebody steps up in terms of just keeping us all informed, because there's always, I felt like Winterco didn't really get a chance to voice their opinion enough. There were some times, where Norris would get on and talk with you guys, and I'm sure that helped a bit. But as the attackers, right, we got quite a lot of airtime and publicity, and our version of the story was definitely well understood. But these Sov wars where, it's, can we break the iHub in a keepstar system, or can we break the iHub on the other side of a regional gate, or a constellation gate that opens up all these kinds of things. Those are the kind of conversations that I'm hoping we'll be having here going forward, as progress is either made or not made on the dual fronts.
We shall see. All right, let's take a quick look at the forums, and then we'll look at some kills, and then we'll take off for the day. If you guys know of anything that's going out there that's worth talking about, just bring it up.
64-bit client transition completed, I think, a day.
Yeah, what did that mean? I didn't read that article. That's a dev blog that just came out.
Essentially, it's a dev blog explaining that they are on like sometime in November, I think like mid-November or something. They're going to be finished with the last bits of the transition to 64-bit, and therefore they're going to be terminating the 32-bit client.
Okay, that's a big deal. So the 32-bit will go away. Right now, you have to opt into 32-bit, but it will go away completely, or not be supported anyway. So they don't have to spend any time trying to.
And they specifically called out that there are a couple of individuals who are still running a 32-bit client or a operating system on a 64-bit able system. So they recommend that those individuals update their operating system so they can actually play the game.
So there's some people still running like Windows XP or something?
Oh no, but they're just running a 32-bit client or like Windows 7 or 10 or whatever. Because you can still choose 32-bit.
Okay. Why would people do that? Maybe if they have, I don't know.
Pass.
Yeah.
Maybe they cracked it and they just didn't have a 64-bit version cracked.
Time to show money.
Yeah, let's go, Lichgrave. All right, so there's a couple of posts in here that are interesting. I don't know if I'm going to highlight them. But this last weekend was SP weekend where you could have gotten, I think it was about 100 or 200 K,
250,000.
250K SP free just for logging in and claiming it.
If you were Omega.
If you were Omega, yeah. If you're an Alpha, it's a bit less, but they would still give you something.
100, 150.
Yeah. All right, so let's look at, I'm looking at the forums, and instead of wasting time reading that and trying to figure out what they're talking about, I'm just going to move over to Dotland statistics. Let's just see if things, the most violent systems in nullsec are, well, Delve had some action, it looks like, in their, I think that's their HQ 1DQ. And then
Yesterday, yes.
Yesterday. What was that about? Do you know?
So some of it was actually Plex for Good related stuff. Somebody brought out a nice blingy ship and let everybody kill it.
Not just any,
for
right?
the-
Wasn't it a Zenitra?
Yes, Jay Amazingness did this, apparently. I wasn't in on it myself. Plus, there were a lot of interesting gate camps going on, and I'm not sure who all the enemy were because we were hunting them down and trying to kill them so fast, sometimes unsuccessfully. But there were actually groups getting footholds yesterday and setting up persistent gate camps in and around 1DQ. Which normally doesn't happen. It was kind of an interesting. I lost one of my ships yesterday to it.
Oh wow! You, but you're part of. You should have safe passage, shouldn't you?
Well,
or the enemy
no,
gate
I
camps.
mean, I mean non-goon gate camps around 1DQ. There were quite a few interesting roving gangs that we had to chase down yesterday. It was actually a great bit of fun.
Well, that's interesting, right? I mean, are you guys like, the implication is you guys are allowing them to be there because this is inside your empire. You should be able to push them out.
Well, there is a fine line between allowing content to come in and people not paying attention and not coordinating.
Yeah, and getting caught. You being the first one to say, hey, there's a gate camp in here.
Yesterday, I lost my sigil because I was safe going between stations and getting caught in a bubble because I was cloaked. But a guy right next to me got popped, and he was burning towards me when he got popped, and his corpse decloaked me, and I was got.
You got. Isn't that the worst feeling when you get decloaked? You're like, no.
By a frozen corpse.
Oh, yeah, that's bad.
But I had fun with it. And then we went up, did some roaming. One thing I'm going to say that may be slightly unpopular is with the changes to Sinos and whatnot, and taking a break so I could get away from all the drama around that, and then coming back, I'm enjoying the game more. You know, it didn't help to have cancer. That kind of took me away for a little bit, but.
Well, glad you're recovering from that.
But the fact is, where it isn't just, oh, throw my umbrella fleet into this, that, and the other thing, or vice versa. We're getting a lot of fairly consistent subcapital action and variety of fleets. It's not just the same stuff coming at us or us going at the same stuff.
Right. That's what I liked about Blackout and after Blackout, the Sino changes is it forces different situations. So the solution you had before isn't optimal anymore, and now you're getting a variety of combat situations, and variety is exciting. Whether you're winning or losing, it is exciting, and that's what makes EVE more interesting.
By the way, it's not just in our region. You know, all of us in SNU, we do Saturday Night Swarm, and I'm seeing variety in other regions as well, like when we go down and fight Test or Brave, down the head GP pipe and all that. I'm seeing a variety of fleet doctrines out. It's not boring anymore.
Good. All right. Further looking at some of the more violent systems in EVE Online, again, in nullsec, you have some action in Impasse. Impasse, I believe, is Test, right?
So that would be Brave, and I'm
Brave.
glad that you got that picture open right there on your screen because PZMA, I almost forgot to mention this, but yesterday at about 4:30 p.m. my time, East Coast, I received 2 capital pings all within the space of 30 seconds. One of them being from PGL, and I immediately knew that something had just occurred. Because this is not often you hear 30 goon caps in our space! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! And so that was quite interesting. That was a surprise. I'm sure there were some brave works that do not appreciate that kind of surprise, but we certainly do in test because we look at that and we go, ooh, time to
So
get
what
the
Goon SC is
insurance
getting
money.
kicked this time?
That's the meme, right? That's the joke, is that you can't bring caps into legacy space without getting the what was that guy's name's
Pittsburgh.
treatment?
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh treatment, yeah, without getting Pittsburghed. That's
Is
it's
that a
unfortunate.
verb now? Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh? No,
I
I'm
hope
pretty sure
not.
that's not what happened.
Yeah.
I think this was for I think this was just for fun. I don't think there was, well, I'm sure Pittsburgh would claim that what he did was just for fun too, but this was more casual, although
Mhm.
somehow we lost 20 bill, which I think that just happens when there's that many caps on grid. Some of your dreads are just going to die. But essentially, we got the ping and we went, and there was this big brawl, and as far as I can tell, everybody was quite happy. So
Well, that's interesting. So when we say the Pittsburgh or getting Pittsburgh, there's a Pittsburgh, what was it, 1889 or something. But Pittsburgh was an FC for Goon Swarm and somebody who was a real workhorse for them. And he did this sort of thing where he jumped
29.89.
29.89. Thanks. He jumped into test space as well. He did it a couple times, and then he was unceremoniously driven out of Goon Swarm for complicating their diplomatic arrangements with Test. And after he was kicked out, he joined Trigger Happy, which was founded by another former Goon Swarm FC, and that's where he resides now. But it was a big moment that happened maybe 2 months ago or a month ago. So so Impasse is attacked. That's Brave Space by Goon Swarm, and it looked like it was a friendly skirmish, but through dreads, right? So that's the interesting part. It's not just a subcapital fleet. These are more dedicated ships, capital ships.
yeah, they got a great mix of fax, dreads, and carriers on the goon side. So I'm sure they took it out knowing full well what might happen. I don't think all of them died. They managed to extract at least a few. Quite a few of them died though.
Okay.
And essentially, there's this interesting dynamic where eventually they're going to find the sweet spot of how long does it take for Test to get capitals there, because with all due respect to Brave and Evictus and all of our legacy members, just if it was them versus goons, it would not be a good time. There would be some issues with that. We work together as a team, and when all the team gets together, that's when we're at our potential and our strongest potential. We've got a bunch of escalation chains, right? Are all what FCs love to talk about. All of that comes in and becomes a problem for our legacy allies if Test isn't involved in that escalation chain. And so essentially what we see here is, okay, 76 bill worth of caps died versus 20 bill worth of stuff died. uh, and it's all great fun, and they can write it off as like, oh well, whelp squad ping, haha, lol.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, the question comes down to, like, what happens when they catch some brave orcs and there isn't the response from tests, because let's say tests are on a strat op or tests are busy or something. That's a very real question, I'm sure, for our allies, and you might see some serious damage that might occur if goons can figure out exactly when to hit on people like Brave or people like Evictus, because the responses capable by Legacy aren't always the same. Like one day Fed Up might be doing something, and so they're not around. The other day Evictus might be, doing their own thing, and so they're not around. It's sort of, I'm sure there's people talking in terms of FCs coordinating with each other of like, hey, we want to plan these kinds of ops. But if you have works out almost, let's see, 23 6.5 or whatever, there's going to be an opportunity there. And so this is just another one of those times where goons pushed a little bit to see the response, and here's how it went. Op success for the good guys supposedly, and we'll see next time potentially that might not be the case.
Okay. Looking into nullsec now. By the way, I just popped over to see what the looks like fraternity lost about 350 members. And normally I check that to see if a corp left, and if that corp left, where did they go? And that tells you something about the political pressure. Sometimes it'll tell you a little more of the story that might be political pressure or something else. But sometimes it's actually just a corporation or several corporations eliminating people that are just inactive and stuff. In this case, I saw the fraternity lost 300 people and Pandemic Horde picked up 300 people. And so I thought, did somebody move from fraternity to Pandemic Horde? Considering they're allies right now, it might be a safe jump, especially since fraternity is actually up near Horde space. So sometimes that happens when you're like in the area. You're like, I think I'll just stay here instead. But that is not the case. So let's see who actually joined Horde real quick, and then we'll go back to the system. So what you can do is click on corporations, and you can order them by when they joined. So Bad Vibe joined Horde, and so that's probably a bulk of it. That's like 200 people. But probably you have these little groups that add up here. This other one, Remember the Fallen, and if you want to check where these came from, you can click into them and check their alliance history in this way. And you can see these guys came from Requiem Eternal. And Bad Vibe came from Trigger Happy. And that is interesting because Trigger Happy just...
That was there was a story behind that, and which is actually funny because that was apparently caused by Israd.
Israd again?
Yeah.
Wow. What happened here?
Apparently there were some discussions regarding whether Trigger Happy within Israd within Trigger Happy was very toxic and whatnot. And that's the argument that they used for Bad Vibes leaving.
Oh, so they wanted to get away from Israd. And did Israd just join Trigger Happy?
It's like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that's right. I think I did see that. Israd is run by Pniv Smash, who's a character. Used to be a long time PL player. He's known for setting up kills that are, pretty good ambushes. That's what those guys do. They left Pandemic Legion and went to Snuff, and Snuff fell apart, and they went to Volta, where Cable met them. And then recently they left again and went to Trigger Happy. So they're jumping to all the groups that are kind of like hotter, low sec, smaller gang fare, so that they can practice the kind of gameplay that they do, which is to try to catch big ships and ambush people and that sort of stuff. But they are, from what I hear, kind of a toxic bunch. And that doesn't work for some other groups. And so people in Trigger Happy look like they're moving to calmer waters, which would be Pandemic Horde. And that just highlights how Pandemic Horde has really stabilized their reputation. It's both fun, large, and permissive. And so it's a good place to go if you want to rehabilitate your corporation. And that's what happened to...
assuming rehabilitating means becoming null block F1 monkeys.
Basically, yeah. Well, what happens in a corporation like Smell, right, out of NC? Now, that's the lead corporation in Northern Coalition. Its roots go all the way back to Atlas. It was one of the original corporations in Northern Coalition. It's big. It's got a bunch of capital pilots, and they just withered into inactivity. And what happens there is usually it's an absence of leadership. All corporations take people with personality to push, and people with means of doing things to entertain the others. So you have 20 guys, 3 out of those 20 guys are the ones that are really making things happen and building that spirit of the group. When those 3 guys go inactive and nobody steps up, that group starts to atrophy, stops showing up, the social network starts to break down. And what you can do if you're a corporation and you're not doing well in the alliance that you're in is you can say, I'm one of those 3 people that makes things happen, and I don't have the time to do it, but I don't want this corporation to fall apart. So I'm going to take it and put it in a place where it can go on autopilot. Other people can take those 20 guys or 17 guys and entertain them while I get free and then can come back to the game. Let's say I'm taking a break for a year. So you want to deposit them in a place where they will have activities to do to keep them warm, to keep them around. So that means when you come back, you can take that corporation and say, I'm back, I have time. Let's go back to the kind of stuff that we were doing. Let's move back into NC dot and start doing what we were doing before. That's how you do it. So when Smell from NC dot went to Horde, it is really kind of a place to get their guys to keep them active. It's kind of like an idling spot. And so Horde has benefited as because they have a reputation for being organized enough to keep a lot of people entertained. And they are a clear alternative to Karma Fleet and Goon Swarm, which does the same thing, which I think somebody just mentioned there, Captain Pugwash. Y dot was wildly inappropriate? Yeah, wildly inappropriate. Did the same thing. Their leadership said, we're going to take off, but we don't want this alliance to die. So they created a corporation and stuck the corporation inside of Goon Swarm and said, here, you guys take these guys, entertain them. We got to go for a while. And that's why that is called Y-dotting. Now, the reason it's called Y-dotting, there's a little more to that story. People thought that it was a move that was engineered by the leadership of Wildly Inappropriate and Goon Swarm, because Goon Swarm was helping them make arrangements, saying, yeah, well, why don't you just fold into us and we'll take care of your guys? And it was seen as kind of a very hands-on approach by Goon Swarm diplomatic corps. And so people said like, you see, that's why you don't want to be friends with Goon Swarm, because they'll talk to your leadership, convince them to absorb your guys, and they will take your corporation out from under you. Because I think there was some leaders that didn't want to do that, and they broke off and did something else. And those guys were bitter about that whole arrangement. But from the perspective of Goon Swarm, they're saying that's responsible leadership. Let's keep people playing this game. If you can't do it anymore in your corporation, we'll take that responsibility for you. Totally depends on how you look at it. There's no such thing as a hostile takeover in EVE Online, because players can vote with their feet, and there is no way to force them, like in the real world, there's no way to force them to stick around. In the real world, you basically say, your job is coming over here. You can leave your job, but your job is over here. Whereas in EVE Online, we don't have jobs in that way. You just have options as a player, and you pick from menus. No, you don't. Like, if somebody were to absorb a corporation, you could basically say like, yeah, that's, I'll just do exactly what I'm doing here somewhere else. There's open employment all over the place. I don't have to, you might have to audition a little bit, but anyway. Okay, so going back to the map. So Pandemic Horde highlighted as a good place. Looks like a stable place, and it's benefiting from that sort of a thing. Looking at nullsec real quick, Tama, it's always busy in Tama, right? That's where a lot of traffic goes through, and it's trade hubs and are within the area. So that is known for its combat, and that's why it's number one. Black Rise, same thing. Citadels, more of it's all very pedestrian. There's no surprises in there. And if you look at most violent high-sec systems, Udama and Jita, those are very much the most violent systems in high-sec. That's where the trade market or the trade market routes are. Cowster, I think, also is in there, although that's a little bit unusual. You have Amar. Verge Vendor looks like there's some activity going over there, and not sure what that entails. Verge Vendor at 300, and Cowster, I think, is that a noose? I don't know. I think it might be a New Bro area. So anyway, things are normal out there, it looks like, with a few exceptions that we talked about early on in nullsec, and then looking at some of the population shifts that have been moving around. Well, that's it for today. Do you guys have anything else before we take off?
Oh yes, Huge Green is anchoring a keepstar on nullsec and secede.
Whoa, really?
Yeah. It's
Siege
coming
Green
out tomorrow at 12. 1 second. Let me get the actual timer. Like 12:15 or something.
What system?
Secede.
It's actually called Seed?
S-I-S.
IDE, yeah.
I-E-D. There, yeah. Whatever.
Oh, it's S-E. Yeah, it's funny
Secede.
because a lot of these names are kind of like, I know what you're talking about. I don't know how to spell it, which is a problem, right? Let's see. S-E-I.
S-I-S-I-S-I-E. Something like that. Can't remember. One sec, I will find. God damn it. S-I-S-E-I-D.
S-I-S-E-I-E-I. Yeah. Hey, Matar. Thank you for doing that. So let's see where that is. It's way down here. Oh, that's an interesting place. Oh, that's why it's familiar. That's part of a little choke point between Rennes and Dodixie. It's off of Losec, the Cinq-les-Saônes region, and
Amamaki area.
yeah, and Hamatar, and that little triangle down there, you can see it, is called the Amamaki area. There's Amamaki police. This is where Alliance tournament, some Alliance tournament guys hang out. It's a very, very ruckus place, and I think it's also the ancestral home of Pandemic Legion. When they're not doing anything out in nullsec, they would hang out here and just basically camp that area and destroy things here and there. And so Siege Green is actually a Korean alliance, and they are putting up a keepstar there. I kind of feel like they must be in cahoots with the locals.
Nope.
No,
But there's nothing the locals can do because they're Korean and they have like everyone in their backs, and they have 500 people in that time zone and so on.
So the times, interesting. So, this is so good. So a Korean alliance is putting down a keepstar in a volatile low-sec area, and there's nothing the locals can do about it. We're talking about PL and Amamaki police and these guys who are good small gang fighters, but they can't amass the people needed to secure or to stop a keepstar from coming down, especially when this group is timing their keepstar for basically downtime. Yeah. Basically a time where Europeans and United States players can't really amass many people because it's in the middle of the night or early in the morning. Wow, that is really interesting. Gonna have to watch that. So when did they put that down? When did they put that down?
Oh, yesterday.
So is it coming out today, right now?
Or sorry, no, today.
Today. So it's coming out tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you put down a keepstar, you have vulnerability for the first 15 minutes. They clearly got past that vulnerability stage. But then you have vulnerability 24 hours later for the last 15 minutes. And so if a group doesn't form to stop that keepstar, it will in fact anchor and be turned online and become a base for these guys. And that is super exciting news. Yeah, I guess Fraternity, as someone says here, Pandemic Legion can get Fraternity to kill it. No, I don't.
They are friendly with each other.
They are blue. Pandemic Legion is.
They're not blue. They're not blue. But they're on friendly terms with
okay.
Green Fraternity.
Thank you for correcting me. They're not allies on paper, but they certainly are cooperative. Although that is not necessarily an easy relationship. I don't know how attached they are to one another. There's some interesting politics.
They won't come kill it. Let's put it that way, because I asked.
Oh, you did? Who did you ask?
Taurus.
You asked Fraternity to come kill it?
I asked Taurus if they were interested in coming and shitting on it, and they just said, yeah, no, they like them and they're friendly and yada yada.
I think the reason I think it's an interesting move is because not only are Koreans insulated by their time zone when they're most active, but they are also right now a hot commodity. You do not want to make them an enemy at a point where they are starting to grow. And because you have localization in Korean now, the expectation, and actually some of the evidence from the data proves that time zone is growing due to Korean participation. So it's a growing sector in EVE Online, and you don't want to make those guys mad. You don't want them your enemy into the future. So I think that keepstar is going to anchor without any problem.
Oh, I totally agree with you. Like, it's definitely gonna go up. There's no one's gonna really contest.
And I think that is like a keepstar with a group that lives in that keepstar is like a beehive in your backyard. So if you live in that area or travel through that area, you are going to see it really busy late at night, which is, for me, is kind of great because that's when I play. So it'll be a very busy area late at night. It's kind of interesting. That's a really good note to end on. Thanks very much for bringing that up. I love these kinds of finds, so anyway, thanks, Cable, very much. Victor, Lichgrave, Delacar had to take off, and thank you for watching today. If you'll stick around for just a second, I'll find someone to raid to give you guys some options. Yeah, look at Torvald's playing. He's a great guy. Enjoy watching him do the stuff that he does. Looks like he's doing some hypernet probably before he actually jumps off and does some something that he's very good at, which is PvP and PvE. So take care, everybody. Thanks. We'll see you tomorrow. And if you listen to this on podcast, I'm going to be switching the podcast over to Talking in Stations proper. So if for some reason you stop getting Today and Eve Online, it's probably because the URL changed. And so we're going to just refresh, just resubscribe if you're not getting it. Okay. And also, yeah, one last shout out to, I don't think shout out's the right word, but condolences to everybody that is a big fan of Kobe Bryant, the American basketball player that died yesterday. When we were doing our show, at that same time, his helicopter crashed into a mountainside, a hillside really, a few miles away because he lives, well, he's in my area, let's put it that way. So maybe like 8 or 9 miles north, just above Malibu, on the other side of Malibu, his helicopter crashed. So it was kind of eerie. The whole Los Angeles area is just completely depressed because he was like a patron saint of LA and he was only 41 and he died with one of his children, which makes it worse. And he died with another father and his whole family. It's just a terrible situation. And sorry that it happened. It's very depressing. On that note, enjoy this raid. And we'll be out in just a second. Thanks very much, everyone, for watching. Really appreciate it. Again, you can always support us at patreon.com/Matterall. Take care.